I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to as a marketing mentor, as a former life coach, who have said something along the lines of, oh my gosh, I want to do so many different things. I must have ADHD. Well, if this is you, or if you're somebody who finds that you're easily distracted, you're going to want to watch today's video because I'm talking to an expert who's going to share 5 things that might not be ADHD, but maybe they are. Hi, my name's Morrow, and I help emerging coaches and transformational consultants step out of isolation and into more authentic connections with messaging that inspires them and their ideal audiences. And if this is you and you're struggling with finding clients, I encourage you to download my free training below, How to Find Clients When Social Media Isn't Doing It For You. So how do you know if something is ADHD or simple distraction? What are the symptoms and how can you kind of differentiate all of that? That's what we're going to be getting into today with my guest, ARIANNA Bradford. ARIANNA is an ADHD coach. She's an author, a public speaker, and she helps people better understand their brains through productivity. And she's got a personal story with ADHD. So ARIANNA, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Nice to have you.
Yeah, I appreciate being here. Yeah, so like June said, my name is ARIANNA Bradford, and I am an ADHD coach. I kind of wound up here by accident. Essentially, I have struggled my entire life, it turns out, with ADHD and in a number of ways that we would not have necessarily caught because it wasn't talked about and it wasn't really, accepted as anything but a child's disease, a little boy's disease, a problem child's disease. And I was not a little boy. I was not really a problem child. And, I really wasn't there. There was really nothing there to follow going according to that attitude. So last year, 2021, at the age of 35, I was really just actually sick and tired of being tired. I was always exhausted. And so I wound up kind of doing some research, and it snowballed initially from finding out that my son had ADHD. And as I was doing research for him, every article that also talked about adult ADHD kind of felt like they were talking about me personally, which, it was kind of frustrating. I was like, I do that, and I do that, and I do this. And so I went ahead and I got evaluated, found out that I had it. And shortly after that, I started working with people on something different. And it was just that because I had been talking publicly about my journey to finding out that I had it, all of my clients that were coming to me were ADHD. And they were saying essentially, hey, I'm really glad, because at the time I helped with social media. That was my job. And they were like, I'm really liking the social media thing. But what I really need is I need help with processes. I need help with productivity. I need help with getting things done. And I suddenly realized that over the years, I have learned a lot without even knowing that I had ADHD, to the point where I had grown a brand. I had written a book. I had rebranded like 30 times. I had done a number of things that a lot of people with ADHD struggle to do, because I learned how to work past that. And those were some tools that I had in my toolbox that they didn't have.
Right.
So I said, that is something that I would like to work with people on. And since then, I've only learned more and taught more. And it's been a really crazy ride, but I'm really happy to be able to help people with ADHD realize that, their brains aren't bad. They're just working a little bit differently from the way things are set up, and that it's still possible to do the things you want to do. You just have to look at it a little bit differently.
Right. So it's working with what you have, which I love. I love so much. Yeah. So I know, like with people that I've coached, sometimes people are like, oh, I must have ADHD because I'm multi-passionate, right? Which is not necessarily ADHD, but could be. So, and I know it's a physical, is it a physical diagnosis, or is it like, it's a mental diagnosis that
it's a mental diagnosis. It's a mental diagnosis, but it does have physical aspects to it.
Right.
But it doesn't always.
Right.
That, there are a lot of people out there, and, I know we're going to talk about something else, but just to say, a lot of people out there, me included, believe that ADHD is actually poorly named, because a lot of people tend to automatically expect hyperactivity to be part of ADHD. And if you're not hyperactive and you're not running all over the place, then you can't possibly have it. In fact, I made that mistake both with myself and with my son. So it is more mental, but there are physical aspects to it.
Right.
Or there can be. Right.
Or there can be. Yeah. So so everything we say today is like kind of what they could be. Like if this applies to you, you know, like it's watching this video alone is not going to tell you whether you have ADHD, right? So don't.
Not at all. So this is not for diagnostic purposes, folks. This is for informational.
This is informational and it's
it's informational. That's all.
A sense of like, is this you? Is this not you? Right.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So what are some things that people might think are ADHD, but doesn't necessarily have to be? We're going to talk about 5 of them.
And we're going to start with the most popular, which is the inability to focus. Probably the number one thing I hear when people message me is, I think I have ADHD. And I am not here to diagnose. I'm not here to invalidate self-diagnosis. I'm not a diagnostician. Right. But one of the big things that I tend to say, you tend to ask is, I want to know, what are your symptoms? Because we're not going to be able to work through them unless I know. And probably the number one thing, sometimes with no other complaints, is I can't focus. And is focusing a difficulty? Yes, but there are other things involved, and just being unable to focus is not enough. There are so many reasons that you could not be able to focus. It could be your nutrition. It could be how well you've been sleeping. It could be depression, anxiety. It also could just be situational. I feel like sometimes people lose track of the fact that their lives have been upset or upended recently, and they've been through a lot. And so they'll be like, oh, I'm having a hard time focusing. And I'll say, okay, what else? And there'll kind of be like this confused silence. And then, we'll get to talking a little bit more. And it's like, but you haven't slept in the last 3 days. Of course, you're going to have a difficulty like focusing, and I love what I do. I'm not going to say that I don't like money. I do, but I'm not here to just make money off of people. I'm here to help people who actually need the help. So there have been times where I've told people, I think that maybe you should give this a try first. And especially when focus is the only problem you're really having, where you're having a hard time focusing, generally, if there seem to be no other complaints, I tend to suggest, if the problem is like, go back and try to get some good sleep. If you're not sleeping well, please see a professional, because sleep kind of fuels everything. So, get help with sleep. If you feel like you're more anxious or upset, please try to see somebody for that first and see if that takes care of it. But focus in itself is not going to indicate that you have ADHD. And in fact, one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is they assume that if you can focus, you don't have ADHD. That's actually also incorrect. We have something called hyperfocus. And hyperfocus is when we find an interest in something, or when something becomes extremely important to us, that's all we zero in on. That's all we focus on. So I used to make this mistake with my son, where I would say, well, he can't have ADHD because he can sit and watch cartoons for hours. Right. But of course he could. It was color, it was movement, it was sound. It kept his attention for 2 hours, So my point being, don't just go off of lack of focus, or don't count yourself out because you seem like you can focus sometimes. Those two things by themselves do not tell you whether or not you have ADHD.
Right. And there may also be expectations about like what focus means. Some people might think focus means being able to sit and like work on the same thing for 3 hours at a time, which is difficult for everyone.
A lot of people don't do that. Absolutely. It's right. And I'm sure that you're familiar with this, but when you're meditating, they will even tell you, if your mind wanders, that's okay. Bring it right back. They don't expect your mind to be clear and empty and not wandering for an entire 5, 10, however long minutes you meditate. They know that the mind is going to wander and that it's busy. So that is another good point. If you're like, well, I can't focus, and it's like, well, how long are you expecting to focus for? And you're like 8 hours out of the day. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
So you're also putting unreal expectations on yourself. You cannot focus for 8 hours straight. No one can. So yeah, make sure that you're being easy on yourself, and that what you're expecting of yourself is also reasonable.
Right. So focus alone, not necessarily ADHD. Good.
Mhm.
Okay. Could be something else. So what's the
Right.
second one?
The second one would be the hyperactivity and movement. A lot of people also tend to assume, well, I'm really hyper. I must be ADHD. And first off, as I said before, actually my main symptom that made me go check was fatigue, which is actually more common for women than men. That's not to say that a man can't, but more
Yeah.
often than not, when they check, women tend to be the ones who are more likely to be tired. And so, I have never been hyperactive in my life. If you were to ask my parents or my husband, like, is Arianna hyperactive? They would laugh at you because I used to nap all the time. I used to feel tired all the time. And that was because of my ADHD. Now, they're not entirely certain as to why, but it could very well be, and I ride with this theory. I like this theory that because our minds are constantly moving, it tires our bodies out before we even get started. So that is something that I think probably kind of goes with it, because I do know that when I have tried to get myself to do things that I want to do or that I don't want to do, the moment that I start actually really thinking about it, I get tired. So, just because you're all over the place, because you have a lot of energy, does not necessarily mean that you have ADHD.
Right.
It could just be that you're a high energy individual, which I am so jealous of. I love people like that, but
Yeah.
that in itself is not the problem. If you are finding that you just can't seem to sit still, again, what you're eating could be playing into it.
How many cups of coffee are you having?
Exactly. How you are as an energy as an individual anyway. Whether or not you're doing something you're interested in, there's a number of different things that could play into that. So just because you tend to have a lot of energy, or because you tend to like to jump around a lot, that doesn't necessarily mean ADHD either.
Right. All right.
Right.
What's number 3?
So number 3 is going to sound like number 1, but it's not. Inattention. So you're going to be like, well, what's the difference between inattention and focus? Well, focus is, well, your ability to laser focus in on something, look at one thing. Inattention actually is going to refer, right? And inattention is about your ability to pay attention even for a short amount of time, not necessarily focus, but pay attention. So a great example of a difference would be, say that we're in a meeting, and focus would be your ability to pay direct attention to what that person is saying the entire time. Inattention is going to be whether or not you can pay attention to literally anything in that room, like at all, like you're daydreaming the entire time. You haven't heard. Yeah, it's not just what's directly in front of you, but what's around you as well.
Right.
So inattention is kind of on a broader scale. Focus is more on a one-on-one. And inattention, people will be like, well, I get bored in meetings easily. Okay, me too. Meetings are boring, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a ADHD. And again, this goes back to what's going on in your life. Is this something that you're regularly interested in? Do you have something sitting back on your desk or waiting for you at home that you're just like, I really need to be getting this done. I would rather be getting this done than what's in front of me right now. How much time have you been giving to your own mental health, to your own thought process lately? Have you really given yourself a chance to think about these things? Usually, and when you do get these thoughts in your head, are you able to pay attention to them? Or do you kind of find yourself backing out of where you're at, like just not being present because you were constantly thinking about other things?
Right.
And inattention is actually extremely, extremely popular with women. We are more likely. Now, does that mean that men don't? No, but it is the most common type that you tend to see with women is the inattentive type. We tend to be the ones whose minds are constantly going.
Right.
They're constantly moving. And that can be ADHD, but it could also just be the fact that, you're the family manager A lot of the time, that's what our job is, right? We're the ones who are in charge of the kids. If the spouse or significant other gets sick, that's suddenly our job. We work, so we have that job. So we kind of automatically are wearing a lot of hats anyway. So if you kind of notice that you're like, wow, I blacked out, I didn't hear anything that was going on during that meeting, could be ADHD, could also just be that you've got a lot of plates spinning already. And that might just mean that you're going to kind of have to figure out what's going to give where, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your brain is ADHD.
Okay. So difference between focus and inattentiveness. Okay. So we've got focus, we've got hyperactivity, inattentiveness. What's number 4?
So number 4 kind of goes with what you said earlier, but it's creativity and what was the term that you used? I really like that, multi-passionate. A lot of people tend to automatically assume like, oh, I'm super creative, but like I can't ever finish anything. I never finish a project. I'm always working on multiple projects at once. That in itself does not mean you have ADHD. Is that popular with people with ADHD? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm guilty of that. Do you know how many things I have like sitting in a file somewhere that I was like, I'm going to get back to this, and then I never did.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah.
So that's totally and completely common. It really, really is. But that in itself does not mean that you're ADHD. It could mean a couple things. It could mean that, you realized halfway through that it just didn't give you joy anymore. That's very common. You could have realized that financially it didn't work for you anymore. You could have realized that there were just certain, in the back of your head, you realized there were just certain points that weren't going to come together and you decided that something else would work. Really, the difference between that and ADHD tends to be, well, first off, there's other things that usually play into it, right? Like it's not just that, but there's also, it tends to be the fact that when we give up, we tend to give up because there is something in there that has us overwhelmed, usually, and play into what I don't like to call it this is what it is. It's executive dysfunction. And what happens is we either become overwhelmed and so we freeze, or something about it just doesn't hit that novelty button like it used to.
Right. You're not getting the dopamine from it.
Exactly. It's not exciting us anymore.
Yeah.
So, and if you're kind of sitting there going, well, what's the difference between that and it not bringing me joy anymore? There really isn't any. And in that situation, if you're noticing that you do tend to drop things every time it doesn't give you joy, then I say, look at your other symptoms that you think you might have, because it can be something that is very common with ADHDers. My point being that just because you do that doesn't mean you're ADHD.
Necessarily, because I've done that so many times in my life. Like I've had I've got so many projects on the go, but what I've realized is, for me, I don't think it's so much. It's like I don't think it's ADHD because I don't really have other symptoms on a regular basis. But for me, it's I love starting things. Right. I love the startup. Right. I love helping people, and I love helping people start their things. So starting is fun. Starting is the fun part, right? That's the excitement. Some people are startup people, and some people are like, the pressing through people. I mean, I do finish things though. I definitely do, but it's just, I've realized for me, like the joy is in the creation, because I'm a creative person. No, for sure. And that's the thing. Like some people are just creative people. I went to grad school for advertising for a while, and pretty much at that point, whenever I was in a group project, everybody just kind of knew, okay, we're going to do the research. I'm going to do the qualitative. When we're ready for the creative stuff, we'll go get ARIANNA, because they did, and it was just because that was where my mind was strongest. It wasn't necessarily, an ADHD thing. It was just that I was best at writing copy and coming up with the visuals. And so they were like, you just sit over there. We'll come get you when we're done, and you can just put all of it together. And be like, okay, that's fine with me. So it could just be kind of like, you're just a creative person. And if that's the case, and you really like creating, there's, as long as it's not really getting in. Yeah. And I guess and I think you made a good point there. It is kind of like, it's a mental thing. Like you mentioned executive function thing. So it is something that switches in the brain versus like regular overwhelm or self-doubt, which all entrepreneurs go through. Absolutely. Like, I don't know anybody who has never had overwhelm or self-doubt who has started their own
It's
business. Like
that's a
that is a
totally normal
natural
feeling.
thing to, and it just simply means something needs to change in your business, right? But if it's something that
100%.
is like a mental thing that's happening, then it's a slightly different thing than a mindset thing.
And you actually are talking about what my number 5 would be, which is overwhelm. Because
Okay,
a lot of
perfect.
yeah, because
Perfect.
a lot of people that's actually maybe it should have been number 2, because that's probably my second most popular thing is, well, I have so much to do and I can't seem to prioritize it and I get so overwhelmed. And it's like, on one hand, I get that. Absolutely. That's annoying. That's a problem. But that in itself is not an ADHD problem.
Right.
ADHD do struggle with prioritization, and I help with prioritization quite often.
Mhm.
But a difficulty in doing that is not uncommon among people who don't have ADHD either. Because the problem is, going back to that spinning plates that we were talking about, everyone at some point is going to be like, oh my God, I have so many things going on. How do I keep track?
Mhm.
The difference really honestly is how you feel looking at all of those things. Generally, someone who is overwhelmed and does not have ADHD looks at these things and they're like, okay, this is a lot. This is a lot, but I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to figure this out.
Right.
And they can sometimes figure it out mentally. Sometimes it's one of those things that they could just sit down and they figure it out. Maybe they give it like a day or two.
Right.
But they're able to, eventually get there.
Like list everything on paper and then like, what's the next,
100%.
what's the next, what's the later? Yeah.
100%. ADHDers, on the other hand, something like that happens and it feels like everything's flying at their face at once. It's very, very hard, especially if you don't write it down, to figure out what is most important. What are you supposed to be doing? And even if you do write it down, looking at it on paper sometimes doesn't help, because then you're just going, oh, good, there are all the points here. It still seems like a lot,
Yeah.
So there's almost this need to cut things down to smaller bits, because trying to shove everything at an ADHD brain is going to be overwhelming. And it's going to be overwhelming to the point where that person may just shut down.
Right.
Right. So there's a little bit of a difference in that. And for all of these, I do want to add that if you're listening to this and you're saying, okay, well, I deal with this, I deal with that, that's fine. But one thing that you also need to ask yourself about is the chronicity of it. How often does this happen? Is it getting in the way of your life? If it's not getting in the way of your life, then, it might just be that this is kind of like a weird situational thing that happens every once in a while. But if you're finding that you constantly struggle with focus, you constantly struggle with prioritization, you constantly are not paying attention and you're always in some sort of dreamland, if all of those things are happening to you chronically, then yes, absolutely, I think you need to go ahead and get evaluated. But that is what plays a huge, huge part in it too. How often does this happen? Is it only happening, once every few months, once a year, or are you literally like losing friends and having a difficulty at work because of it? Or not even that badly, just somewhere in the middle, are you just noticing that you're constantly not getting things done and it's kind of driving you crazy? Or you're getting things done, but you feel like you're just getting it done by the skin of your teeth all the time.
Right.
Then you're probably talking about something that is an actual disorder that needs to be looked into. So keep that in mind as well. When you hear all of this, the chronicity of it plays a huge part.
Right. Chronicity. I love that word.
Me too. I actually just learned it 2 days ago and I was so excited. Actually, that's like 3 weeks, but I was like, what is the word for like the noun for chronic? Is it chronicness? And they're like chronicity. I was like, hey, I like that. So I've been using it.
Awesome. Yeah. So if it's chronicity. So let's recap. What are those 5 things?
First one is an inability to focus. Second one is hyperactivity. The third is inattention. The fourth is creativity or multi-passion, hyper,
like doing a lot of things, but
about a lot of stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And the fifth is overwhelm. So those are your 5.
All right. Fantastic. And so you help people who have been diagnosed with ADHD find ways to get stuff done. Is that kind of,
Yeah. Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to be diagnosed. If I do, like I said, if we're talking and I do feel like it probably is a bit of
Mhm.
an issue for you, then I'm not going to ask for a doctor's note or anything. But I do work with people with ADHD, and I have a productivity centered focus, which means that I know that a lot of our shame, a lot of our concern for ourselves comes from our ability or inability to get things done. So what I tend to do is I tend to start by helping you get processes in place and systems in place that help you get more done. And kind of naturally, as we go, you start looking into how you feel about yourself, how you have been defining your own success, how you have been defining productivity for yourself. And I always tell people my goal is to make it so that my clients don't need me anymore eventually. So I want them to get to the point where, maybe they have to come see me once in a year to be like, remind me again what we're supposed to do, but that there is this overall feeling of empowerment because you know now how to define those things for yourself, how to kind of keep going through your day and getting things done, and how to handle days where you don't get things done. So yeah, that's kind of how I work.
Fantastic. And how can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about what you do?
So if you would like to work with me directly, you can set up an intake call. All of my intake calls are free. They're only 30 minutes, and that's where we figure out how you feel about me and whether or not you would like to work with me. You can do that at youradhdone.com
Nice.
slash ADHD coaching, or if you just want to go to youradhd.com or youradhdone.com and just check it out, you can do that too. If you're not quite ready for coaching and you would really just kind of like to get a little bit of help and see what it's like to be taught by me, I actually released a mini course called Get That Thing Done. It is for people who are struggling with executive dysfunction, and it kind of walks you through all the reasons why you might be going through it, has a bunch of worksheets and printables for you to kind of work that out on your own. And I will give you the link for that because it's not an easy link for me to say out loud,
Okay.
but that is also an option.
We'll put that below this video, both of those links below this video.
Okay,
Great.
awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Arianna, for being here. This was really, really interesting. It's a topic that I've been curious about for a very long time, and I know that a lot of the people I work with are curious about it as well. Well, if you are somebody who finds that you're easily distracted with social media, whether you think you have ADHD or not, and you're finding that this is just not working for you as a way to connect with clients, I would love for you to download my free training, How to Find Clients When Social Media Isn't Doing It For You. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like or that, leave a comment below. And if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel and never forget, you got this.